Please give a warm welcome to Neil Mitchell.
What an act to follow with that video, really. Gee, the memories of the stone and the hot metal. Half the room probably doesn't know what hot metal is, and I don't blame you. Can we get rid of that photograph, really? Because I just feel he's looking over my shoulder, waiting for me to stuff up here. That was the nature of the man. A word kept coming to mind, which I hadn't written down in my notes as I was watching that video, and that was energy. There's a lot of other words too. Now, I know what you'll be thinking. Here's some radio bloke who's going to talk about himself for 10 minutes, because that's what radio blokes do. That's the radio disease. In a sense, I've got a bit of a licence to do that tonight because it's about my memories of Graham Perkin, but I feel a little fraudulent standing here because the words of Elton John, I would love to have known him, but I was just a kid. I started at the age, Australia Day, 1969. So I had about 5 years under Graham Perkin, and yeah, I was terrified of him at times, in awe of him, and had a massive respect for him. But I think of some of the people in this room who worked with him much more closely and at a more senior level, and I look forward to hearing their stories through the night. I think we probably have to start from the point that Graham wasn't perfect, and if you think about it, he'd probably be illegal today. You can get a hint of it there. I mean, just think about where he crossed that line. Blasphemy. You're not allowed to be blasphemous these days. What was that favourite saying? Jesus, chap! That was a sign that you'd stuff something up. Probably meant the headline wasn't good enough. That's probably not allowed. Or the noise. He was a very noisy, energetic, as I said, sort of person. It wasn't a restrained form of leadership from Graham Perkin. Occupational health and safety, tick. He would have broken those rules pretty quickly. He loved to throw things at people. They usually deserved it. You know, the headline wasn't good enough and something had come flying across the desk. That's a habit Les Carline picked up, and I remember nearly seeing him decapitate the chief sub one night with a metal ruler. In the days we had metal rulers. Swearing. Graham Perkin was known to swear a bit. I think these days he would have had a House committee turn up with a petition dripping in yoghurt or something to object. Smoking. I mean, you couldn't edit a paper without a cigarette. I notice this photograph in here. I think he's throwing the ball in as a boundary umpire somewhere, and there's the cigarette sticking out of the corner of the mouth. Camel, I think, no filter Camel, as I remember. But I just imagine Graham Perkin on edition time, or a lot of the people in those days, as things are getting tense and you just had to have a cigarette, rushing down to Lonsdale Street to have a quick fag before you went up and laid up page one. So, illegal again. Alcohol in the office, there's a bit of that. Sarcasm, a bit of that. I think Graham Perkin today would have been subject to so many petitions and House committee meetings that he would have lost patience with it all. But we copped it, and we loved on it, and we thrived on it. And so did a superb newspaper, because we respected him and his abilities and his leadership and his vision and that word energy that I'd forgotten, again, energy. Because I think Graham Perkin produced a culture and an atmosphere and a sense of excitement that made you love journalism and what you were doing. And if you just excuse me drifting back to that radio habit of talking about yourself again, I'm sure that along the way he helped to shape my life and a lot of others. He shaped my life through that culture where he created this example amongst people he taught and encouraged, not me directly, but the people that he brought up, like Les Carline, Greg Taylor, Ray Blackburn, who we saw at that picture conference. He gave to me and others a model of journalism which I haven't seen bettered yet, and he certainly created in a lot of us an undying love for that style of journalism and what it meant. I still love journalism. I still love that craft because I still see examples of the sort of craft that Graham Perkin honoured, even though perhaps fewer these days. But those that influence came through Graham and those sort of people I mentioned, because he set an uncompromising standard. It was a standard of integrity, but also excitement and fun and determination and cheap and troublemaking and pot stirring and have a go sort of stuff, a bit of self-belief. Ideas, But underneath it all, there's this firm belief, I believe, that you didn't take yourself too seriously. Because if you did, you ran the risk of losing touch with what was the most important thing of all, and that came through even that video we saw, which is the audience, the people you work for. And if you did drift into this area of self-congratulation, and remember, I'm saying this as a kid who had very little to do with him, but I saw it happening. You drift into that self-congratulation, there'll be a queue of people who put you back in your place and remind you just what a privilege it was in those days to sit in that grubby old reporter's room. Well, it wasn't grubby, but it was tacky by today's standards. The old reporter's room bashing at some old typewriter that had been there since the Symes were, and see your work in print, because too many people tend to forget it is a privilege to have that audience, whether it's print or radio or television. It is a privilege. And I think we grew with this culture that it was a privilege you didn't abuse. You didn't abuse it with laziness or pretension or sleazy deals or looking after mates or cash for comment, or heaven knows, even by being dull and boring. You just didn't abuse this privilege. So what I think Graham Perkin did that was different, what he did so well, was that he inspired. Just a little example, I was an industrial reporter, as was mentioned in his later years, but I remember October 1972, the Faraday kidnapping. 6 kids, a little country school up north, 6 kids and their teacher kidnapped from this school, and the ransom was $1 million. 1972, $1 million. Kevin John Eastwood, I think, was the man behind it, and somebody else. He then went on to conduct another kidnapping. Anyway, the Sun had the scoop. They really had the jump on us. I'd been off at Trades Hall having a long and very important meeting with contacts over several bottles of red wine. So from memory, it was a Friday night, and I've walked into the reporter's room with a big red wine grin and think it's time to have a beer before I go home. And they grabbed me. There was Graham Perkin and Les Carline and others running around. The big story they'd just realised they'd missed. And the next thing, I'm in a car rushing up the highway, not driving, I hasten to add, to Faraday, all hands on deck. You know, the industrial reporter, the political, everybody. I remember very well standing in a phone booth, an old red phone booth in the middle of nowhere, filing on the phone direct to Les Carline, who was on the stone with Graham Perkin, dictating it to a typesetter to put it into that strange hot metal thing you saw. I remember hiding under the dashboard of a car in the main street of Wood End when Lindsay Thompson, as Education Minister, was standing in the street with the ransom to pay over. Back in Melbourne, Graham Perkin, Les Carline and the culture, they were ripping the paper into shape. They begged, borrowed and stole pictures from the Sun. And I remember when I got back to Melbourne, which must have been, I suppose, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, we were all so proud of what we'd produced. There was a real sense of pride. We'd been beaten, we'd come back and we'd produced a bloody good paper that in the end we would think was better. In fact, from memory, the presses ran till about 10 in the morning. It was superb editing at all levels. Now, you can say that's easy with a big story, and it is harder when it's a slow news day, obviously, but they were exciting too. The point was we had worked endlessly and dangerously, in some cases, to get it done, and to get it done for this culture that had been created by this man and the people around him. So what else did he do? He led, he planned, his news judgment, his sense of what interested people was pretty much unquestioned by us, and that would be unusual these days to see junior staff not questioning, and maybe it was unhealthy, but it was a damn good sense of news judgment, and we followed it. He campaigned, he treated politicians as they should be treated. The cliche, he edited without fear or favour, and he analysed. I mean, the Whitlam thing was mentioned. Have a look at some stage of how he identified Whitlam as the mood in the up-and-coming era of 72, and then gradually realised, hang on, this isn't working. He shouted a lot, as I said. He belted the desk and he laughed and he stirred up his staff. He gave the paper soul and heart and character, and he gave the staff a sense of involvement and commitment and a determination to do the job even better. I reckon that you went to work excited to be going to work and determined that, geez, I mucked it up a bit yesterday, I can do better today. That sounds twee, but it was real, very real. There was also, in his leadership, an underlying understanding that he could do it all better than you anyway. A bit like Les Carline. I mean, Les is a pain in the neck because he can do anything. And I only say that because I know Les better, but, lay out a page, write the story, crop the picture. He can take you from the guts of a budget to the middle of a Melbourne Cup, as you all know. Perhaps it's my youth at the time, but I don't think so. It was a spectacularly exciting environment in which to operate. You took nothing for granted. You worked harder at doing better all the time. And you felt this sense of pride in a product that often you'd had nothing to do with. Other people had produced it. You'd had a day drinking red wine with the contacts at Trades Hall. But you'd look at that paper and say, oh, gee, you'd walk a bit taller. Different things happened under Graham Perkin. Exciting things happened. There was that pride. We were firmly convinced we were the best paper in the country. We knew we could get better. We knew we could change things, and we probably thought we could change the world. I know all things look golden in retrospect, but I've thought a lot about this, and the legacy of Graham Perkin is that standard he created and the people who were around him at the higher levels than me. The legacy of Graham Perkin was that standard and the impact it had on journalism. Not just The Age, journalism broadly, because so many who were part of it have gone out into the wider journalistic world. I'm sure he could be difficult and pig-headed and make mistakes. We all do that. But he created this standard and level of excitement which has been spread by those who worked under him. They called him Mr. Big, by the way, behind his back, although I imagine he knew. But he was a bigger, larger-than-life character. He had that death stare that you can see, that Julie Bishop at Envy. You'd see him looking at you under those eyebrows, and it's interesting, all the photographs show it, and you knew what he was going to say before he even spoke. He could transmit excitement, which is something I envy in his leadership, a rare leadership skill to transmit that excitement. And that footage of him walking down to the picture desk, I have so many memories of that, striding down, cigarette, ruler, shouting at Ray Blackburn, about what a load of crap he'd produced, and everybody sort of hanging on every word. He'd dominate the back bench. He sat there and fiddled words and layouts and pictures all night, shouting and laughing and throwing things. You got the sense that something energetic was happening, and it would flow through to the paper. I was a kid, I didn't really know him, but he did call me to his office one day, and this sticks in my mind all these years later. With another cadet, a guy called Peter Sterling, we'd constructed a 3-part series on the legal system, which had got a good run in the feature pages, which is unusual for a couple of cadets, and he was impressed by it. I thought we'd stuffed it up, which is why he was calling me in, but actually what he wanted to know was where the idea came from and how we workshopped the idea and what we'd done to get it where we did get it. I didn't have a clue, of course, it had just happened, but that was an indication of the importance he put on ideas. Incidentally, I've since learned from Les Carline that he did know me a little, identified me early on that maybe I had a bit of a chance of being something other than hopeless, but he could never remember my name. So he always referred to me as that one with the fat fingers. I don't know where he got that from, really. But that'd probably be illegal today too. Look, it was devastating when he died. He'd been so much larger than life. And I think it should be said that if he had lived, Australian journalism would be a lot better today. For all the people Graham Perkin led and inspired and nurtured in that gruff and bombastic way would have gone on, there would have been more of them, and they would have gone on to influence more people and do more things in the media that should be done. If he had lived, he would have touched more generations. He set a standard which, if he had lived, would have grown even stronger and wider and better. Whatever he had done after he finished editing The Age, and he mentioned maybe 2 more years, would have continued to breed the culture in Australian journalism and turn out the devotees of brilliance like Les Carline. I think if Graham Perkin had lived another 30 years, we would have had an entirely different media in this country, and we would have had a better country. Thank you.